The wind off the Appalachian foothills carried a sound that locals swore was older than language. Some said it was the trees groaning. Others whispered it was the earth remembering. In the town of Pine Hollow, the difference mattered more than most of America would ever understand. In the summer of 1994, 7-year-old Ellie Morgan disappeared from her bedroom without a trace. Pine Hollow searched every inch of its forest, turned over every stone, and sent prayer after prayer up into the same thick sky that hung over generations of coal miners and moonshiners. What they never admitted out loud, even in the flickering light of vigil candles, was the one shared memory that bound everyone to their fear. The night before Ellie vanished, an old house that had stood abandoned since anyone could remember had a light in its window. By the time our story begins 25 years later, Pine Hollow is a ghost of itself. The mines have closed, the main street has more boarded windows than working stores, and the football team that once went to state championships now begs the county for enough money to replace helmets. Yet, there is a community here, bound by Friday night church dinners, gossip at the post office, and the knowledge that they are mostly invisible to the rest of the world. Sarah Winslow never meant to come back. At 28, she had built a life in Charlotte as a mid-level marketing manager, with a modern apartment and friends who knew nothing about the old house on Ridge Road. When her mother called to say that her father's heart had finally given out, Sarah returned out of obligation rather than nostalgia, thinking she would stay just long enough to sell the family home and say the right words at the funeral. She did not expect to find a town frozen by something other than poverty. Her first night back, she sat on the sagging porch and listened to cicadas hum in waves. Across the street, Mabel Harris, a neighbor who had once babysat her, sat in a rocking chair. Mabel's hair was thinner and her skin more folded than Sarah remembered, but her eyes held the same alertness. "You see the light yet?" Mabel asked after the small talk dried up. "What light?" Sarah replied, although she knew before the question was finished. Childhood memory flared, unbidden. A house, weather-beaten and leaning, at the end of Ridge Road, its windows like eye sockets. She had walked past it 1,000 times on the way to school, always crossing to the other side of the street without conscious thought. The old stories, children whispering that it was haunted, older siblings daring each other to ring the bell, had colored her imagination. But she never saw a light there. "It's burning again," Mabel said quietly. "Not all the time. Some nights. The same way it did when little Ellie went missing." Sarah laughed, a reflex to shake off the chill climbing her spine. "Someone probably bought it. Maybe they're fixing it up." "Maybe," Mabel replied, but her expression made clear she didn't believe it. "You keep your lights on, honey, and if you hear anything in the night, anything you can't explain, you come over. Don't go outside." Inside the house, Sarah unpacked the essentials and tried to settle. Her father's absence hung in the air with the weight of silence. His chair was empty, his mug untouched. In her old bedroom, posters of bands she had long since stopped listening to curled away from the walls. Sleep did not come easily. When it finally did, she dreamed of hands scraping at the outside of the house, fingertips tapping in the same rhythm as the cicadas. Around 2 in the morning, she woke up. The dream had felt like reality, and for a moment she still heard tapping. She sat up, heart pounding. The house was dark except for the nightlight she'd plugged in at the hallway, a habit she thought she'd outgrown. The tapping continued, methodical, like someone knocking politely on a door. Without meaning to, Sarah walked toward the sound. It wasn't coming from outside her bedroom or even from the front door. It was coming from beneath her. The basement in the Winslow house was a place of canned goods and old paint cans, lit by a single bulb with a chain. Her father had kept the door locked since she was a child, but the key had hung on a nail in the kitchen. Now, the door stood slightly ajar. The tapping stopped as soon as she put her hand on the knob. Sarah's mind raced through possible explanations. Pipes expanding, animals in the walls, her imagination. "You're being ridiculous," she whispered to herself. She opened the door the rest of the way. Cold air rushed up to meet her. She fumbled for the string and pulled. The bulb flickered, then glowed. For the first time in years, she saw the basement. Concrete floor cracked in places. Wooden shelves lined with jars of green beans and pickles. And in the far corner, something that had not been there before. A wooden door constructed in the stone wall, with black iron hinges that looked far older than the house itself. It was not possible. That wall faced the outside, the backyard sloping down toward the creek. She approached cautiously. The door had no handle, just a ring embedded in the wood. She stood inches from it, her breath frosting in the cold, and suddenly understood that the tapping had been on this door from the other side. Her rational mind rebelled. She closed the basement door, turned the key in the lock, and returned to her bedroom with the speed of someone trying to outrun something intangible. She slept with the lamp on, the covers pulled up to her chin, listening for any sound, but hearing only her own pulse echo in her ears. In the morning, sunlight made the memory seem absurd. The basement door looked as it always had. She forced herself to open it. The basement below looked mundane. There was no wooden door. The far wall was stone, unbroken, except for a web of cracks near the ground. Sarah laughed, the sound sharp in the still house, and chalked up the night to exhaustion and grief. The old house on Ridge Road, however, didn't let her forget. Later that day, she went to the grocery store, where she ran into her high school friend Jared, now the deputy sheriff. He looked tired, with worry lines etched deeper than his age should have allowed. "I heard you're back," Jared said, pulling her into a half-hug. "Just for a bit," she replied. "How's it going?" Jared hesitated, then lowered his voice. "Keep your doors locked, Sarah. We've had disturbances." "Break-ins?" He glanced around. "No, disappearances. Cats, mostly. An old dog. Last week, Ray Pratt's goats broke through the fence and wouldn't go back. They were terrified of something. When we found them in the morning, they were all huddled together, eyes wide, not a scratch on them. Wouldn't eat or drink for 2 days after." Sarah forced a laugh. "It's probably coyotes." "Maybe. Just be careful. People around here are on edge." That evening, a red glow lit up the horizon. Sarah stood on her porch and saw that the old house at the end of Ridge Road had a light burning in the upstairs window. It wasn't the warm yellow of a lamp or the flicker of candlelight. It was a steady, pulsing red, like the steady beat of a heart. The color seeped into the night like an infection. Phones in Pine Hollow had never been very good at reception, but Sarah took her cell out and snapped a picture anyway. The image on the screen was almost black. The red light was a faint smear. She thought about driving over, but the memory of the tapping in the basement stopped her. Instead, she watched as the light pulsed, counting between beats. There were 13 seconds between each pulse. When she couldn't stand it anymore, she closed the door and checked the locks twice. In the night, she dreamed again of tapping. But this time, there was a voice. It whispered her name, elongated and distorted. as if spoken through water. Sarah. The following days unearthed more strangeness. A classmate she barely remembered showed up at her father's visitation and asked if she'd heard the singing. A woman at the diner muttered that the river had been running backwards at dawn. Children walked in groups, even between houses a few yards apart, holding hands like if one let go the others would be sucked into a crack. Through it all, the old house's light continued to pulse some nights and remained dark on others, with no pattern Sarah could discern. As she sorted through her father's desk, she found a journal she didn't recognize. It was leather-bound and old, its edges worn soft. The first page was dated October 1953. The handwriting belonged to her grandfather, a man who had died before Sarah was born. Curiosity won over privacy. She sat down and began to read. The journal wasn't a diary of daily activities. It was a collection of stories, each labeled with a date, each telling of something that had happened in Pine Hollow that did not fit into any rational world. There were entries about disappearing livestock, about a boy lost for 3 days who returned speaking in a language no one understood, about lights in the woods. One entry, dated July 6, 1969, sent ice through Sarah's veins. July 6, 1969. There is a door in the basement that opens onto nothing I can explain. We heard tapping last night, the same tapping my father heard when he was a boy. I opened it once. There are steps going down into earth. The air is wrong. It smells like old rain. I did not go far. Something called my name in my mother's voice. I shut it and I nailed it closed. If you are reading this, do not open it again. Whatever is below remembers, even if we pretend to forget. Sarah slammed the journal shut. Goosebumps prickled her arms. She wanted to throw the book into the trash, but something made her place it carefully back in the drawer. How had she seen the door if her grandfather had nailed it closed 50 years ago? Why hadn't her father ever mentioned it? More importantly, was it still there? She did not want to find out. That night, the light in the old house pulsed with increasing urgency. Sarah counted. 13 seconds between pulses, as before, until midnight, when the rhythm changed. 10 seconds. Then 7. Then 5. It was speeding up. She watched until her eyes ached, unable to look away, feeling in her bones that the light was not just a light. It was a signal, a warning, a heartbeat. When it reached a pulse every second, it held, steady and relentless. And then it went out. The silence that followed was almost heavier than the pulsing. Even the cicadas seemed to pause. In that breathless space, Sarah heard movement in her yard. Something shuffled across the grass. She peered through the curtains and saw nothing. A soft scratch, like claws, dragged along the base of her front door. She gripped her phone, ready to call Jared, when a voice spoke on the other side of the door. "Sarah," it whispered. Not her name distorted, not through water, but clear, familiar. It sounded like her father. "Dad?" she whispered back before she could stop herself. Her throat tightened. Tears sprang to her eyes. "Open the door, sweetheart," the voice said. "It's cold out here." Logic battled emotion. Her father had been buried in the ground only days earlier. She had stood above his coffin, watching it descend. But the voice was him. Her hand moved toward the lock. From the back of the house, she heard another voice, low and steady. "Sarah, don't." She froze. The voice was her father, too, but not from outside. It came from the hallway behind her, from the direction of the basement door. 2 voices, identical, asking her to choose. The front door rattled. The basement floor creaked. Her mind raced. Which was real? What would happen if she chose wrong? She stepped back, her eyes darting between the front and back of the house. The front doorknob twisted. The basement door began to open on its own. "Sarah!" Both voices called out, one pleading, one warning. She covered her ears, her heart hammering, and screamed, "Stop!" Silence fell. The front door stilled. The basement door swung shut. In the quiet, she heard the faintest sound, like a sigh of disappointment. She slept little that night, but no more voices called. In the morning, the world looked normal again. The old house at the end of Ridge Road was empty, its windows reflecting the sun. The river flowed in the correct direction, but the weight of the night before stayed with her like a bruise. Sarah decided to confront the source of the disturbance directly. She waited until twilight and walked down Ridge Road. The air grew cooler as she approached the old house, a 2-story structure with peeling paint and wild vines climbing its porch columns. The front door hung crookedly. She stepped onto the porch and felt the wood flex under her weight. She had expected to hear whispers or sense a presence. Instead, there was nothing. Dust motes floated in shafts of light, as if the house contained its own weather system. The furniture inside was draped with sheets that had yellowed with age. She climbed the stairs to the 2nd floor, the boards creaking. At the end of the hall, she found the room with the window that had glowed red. The curtains were decayed, the glass cracked, but there was no lamp, no wires, no explanation for the light. On the floor, however, she saw footprints. They were small, as if made by a child, and led to the closet. A childish handprint smeared the dusty door, which was slightly ajar. Sarah's throat tightened, remembering Ellie Morgan. She opened the closet. Inside, there was no clothing rod or shelves, just a hole cut into the back wall, leading into darkness. The smell hit her first, damp earth and something metallic. A breath of wind wafted up from the opening. She peered down and saw a set of narrow stairs descending into blackness. They looked worn smooth by generations of feet. Caution screamed for her to turn back, to call Jared, to burn the house down if necessary. Curiosity, dread, and a nagging feeling that this was not just about her own safety, but the safety of Pine Hollow kept her rooted. She pulled out her phone, turned on the flashlight, and aimed it down the stairs. The beam illuminated stone walls and the first few steps, then was swallowed by darkness. Against her better judgment, she descended. The air grew colder with each step. The walls were damp and slick. She counted as she went. 10, 20, 30 steps. The beam landed on a flat dirt floor. The space opened into a cavern carved into earth, bigger than she had expected. Tree roots dangled from the ceiling like dark tendrils. In the center of the room stood a wooden door, identical to the one she had imagined in the basement. Black iron hinges, no handle, only a ring. She realized with a jolt that she was under her own house. The direction, the slope, it all made sense. Ridge Road curved. These tunnels must connect. Without meaning to, she had followed the path that the tapping, the red light, and the voices had been pointing toward. As she approached, the door shuddered. Dust fell from its frame. Something on the other side pressed against it, slow and deliberate. The ring moved, rising slightly, as if weight had been placed on it. She took a step back. From behind the door came a voice. Not her father's, but childish and feminine. "Help me," It pleaded. Please, help me. It could have been Ellie. It could have been any of the stories in her grandfather's journal. It could have been something else entirely. Her throat tightened. "Who are you?" she asked. Silence. Then, "I'm so cold." She thought of her own fear, of the goats huddled together, of the people on edge. She thought of the journal entry that had warned her not to open it, of her grandfather who had nailed it shut. But if someone was truly trapped... She reached out and touched the ring. It was ice cold. Her fingers closed around it. The wood vibrated under her touch, as if something on the other side was aware of her. One more pull would open it. Above her, she heard footsteps. Heavy ones, not like a child's. Someone was in the tunnel. The beam of another flashlight cut through the dark. "Sarah!" Jared's voice echoed off the walls. Relief and embarrassment washed through her simultaneously. "How did you—" she began, but Jared cut her off. "Don't touch that," he said sharply, closing the distance between them. His face was drawn, his eyes wide with a fear she had never seen in him, not even when they'd been teens sneaking around. "You knew about this?" she asked, letting go of the ring. "Everyone knows," he replied. "We just pretend we don't. We try to forget. That's how we live here. That's how we keep whatever's behind this door from noticing us. But you're stirring it." "I heard a voice," Sarah began. Jared shook his head. "That's what it wants. It knows you. It knows your father's voice, your voice. It's been here longer than our families, longer than the town. It's a hunger, a memory. It feeds on attention. When we look away, it sleeps. When we listen, it wakes. Your grandfather learned that the hard way. So did mine. So did Ellie Morgan's parents." Guilt and anger twisted inside her. "Why didn't anyone tell me? Why did my family never say a word?" "You wouldn't have believed it," Jared said. "The only way to believe is to hear it. And by the time you hear it, it's almost too late. Come on, we're leaving. Do not look back. If you hear it behind you, keep walking. If it calls your name, keep walking." They moved together through the tunnel, Sarah's flashlight illuminating the path. Behind them, the door shuttered again. A soft voice whispered, "Please." It sounded like her younger self. Sarah bit her lip so hard she tasted iron. She focused on the circle of light ahead, on Jared's steady footsteps. Halfway up the stairs, she stumbled. A hand caught her elbow. She almost thanked Jared until she realized his hand was on her shoulder. Something else had grabbed her. Cold fingers wrapped around her wrist. A second later, a sharp pain pricked her skin like a thorn or a claw. She yanked her arm free with a shout. Jared hauled her up the rest of the stairs, slammed the closet door shut, and dragged a dresser in front of it. They burst into the night air, gasping. Sarah clutched her wrist. A small mark, like a puncture, oozed a drop of blood. It burned. She wanted to wipe it, but she hesitated, afraid of what might enter through the wound. "Go home," Jared said, sweat shining on his forehead. "Take the longest way possible. Do not walk past this house again. Keep your lights on. And whatever you do, don't talk about this anymore. Don't even think about it. If it starts calling, ignore it." "How do you live like that?" Sarah asked, her voice shaking. "Just pretending it doesn't exist? Letting it take?" Jared's jaw tightened. "You think we like it? You think anyone should have to make that choice? But people don't have money to leave. Our lives are here. So we carve out a space. We tell ourselves stories about normal things. We go to church. We raise our kids. We ignore the tapping. We don't feed it curiosity. That night, Sarah lay in bed, her wrist throbbing. She tried to follow Jared's advice. She turned on the TV to drown out her thoughts. A static-filled local channel played an old western. Her eyes drifted to the wall where her father's wedding photo hung. In the flickering light, his face seemed to move. She shook her head and focused on the movie. Outside, the cicadas sang. The house settled. In the quiet between commercials, she heard it. A faint tapping, like rain that hadn't begun yet. It was distant, like hearing a party down the street. She turned up the volume. The tapping grew louder. It wasn't coming from the basement. It was coming from her mind, like memory. Then a voice accompanied it. Sarah. It was her own voice, from when she was 7, calling out in the dark. She covered her ears and hummed. The sound persisted. She needed help. She considered calling Jared, but he had made clear that knowledge made things worse. She needed to occupy her mind. She opened her laptop and started typing an email to a friend in Charlotte. Something normal. Something about job prospects, and maybe meeting up when she returned. Words flowed, but the tapping filled the spaces between them. Her gaze drifted to the mark on her wrist. The skin around the puncture had turned gray, the color of ash. She rubbed it, but the color did not change. The burn did not fade. The next morning, she woke up with the smell of damp earth in her nostrils. She looked at her wrist. The gray had spread up her forearm in veins like cracks. Panic flared. She ran cold water over it. The skin stung, but did not change. She called the clinic. The nurse told her to come in. The doctor, a man she'd known since childhood, examined the mark with furrowed brows. Bite? He suggested. Maybe, she lied. He prescribed an antibiotic and told her to come back if it worsened. Sarah swallowed the pills obediently, but the gray continued to spread, inching toward her elbow. By the 3rd day, numbness crept along with it. She could barely feel her fingers. She went back to the clinic. The doctor looked alarmed and sent her to the hospital in the next town, which then sent her to a specialist in Knoxville. The specialist ran tests, took photographs, conferred with colleagues. They found nothing in medical literature that matched. They spoke in hushed tones. They used phrases like necrosis of unknown origin. They scheduled a biopsy. Back in Pine Hollow, Sarah sat on her porch with Mabel. The old woman stirred her sweet tea. You look tired, honey, Mabel said. You been hearing things? Sarah nodded. Words were unnecessary. Mabel reached out, gently touching the gray skin. Her fingers were warm. My Henry had a mark like that, she said softly. During the war. Came back from training with it. Spread up his arm. He died before it got to his shoulder. Said he heard drums in his sleep. Her eyes clouded. Sometimes I hear them too, on bad nights. Sarah swallowed. What did he do? Get it? Mabel gazed down the road toward the old house. He went in there on a dare. Boys do stupid things. He heard a baby crying. He thought it was real. He never did tell me what he saw. He couldn't. His tongue swelled, like he couldn't speak of it. A chill rippled through Sarah. No one ever leaves, she murmured, half to herself. Mabel shook her head. Some do. Most come back. It's like the hollow has a rope tied around your waist. You can get as far as that rope lets you. If you try to cut it, your hands go numb. If you ignore it, it tugs. It's in the soil, in the river, in our blood. Maybe our people did something wrong a long time ago. Maybe we built on ground that belonged to something else. We make do. We mind our business. We don't open doors we can't close. Sarah stared at the mark creeping up her arm. She had always been practical, grounded. She had built her life on logic and reason, and yet here she was, marked by something she couldn't explain, hearing voices in the walls. Her mind had two choices: accept the impossible or lose itself denying it. She decided to fight back, not by pretending ignorance, but by understanding. If knowledge was a weapon that fed the thing, then ignorance was not safety, but complacency. She dug up her grandfather's journal again and read every entry. She found patterns. The tapping happened in cycles, every 27 years. Lights in the old house preceded disappearances. Marks on skin spread unless, she read and reread, unless the person who was marked severed their ties to Pine Hollow completely. One entry told of a woman who left for good, taking nothing with her, not even a photograph. The mark faded over months. Another entry described a man who tried to bury his arm in the ground, thinking if the mark touched soil, it would sink into the earth. He lost his arm and his life. Sarah remembered the rope metaphor. It wasn't enough to leave physically. She had to cut the rope in other ways. She made a list: sell the house, donate her father's belongings, sever connections. But then she thought of Mabel, of Jared, of the kids walking in groups. How could she leave them to this thing? Could she live with herself, hearing tapping in her head in Charlotte, knowing Pine Hollow was still under siege? She took a deep breath and did something her grandfather's journal had never mentioned. She talked about it. Not whispers on porches, not cautious warnings in grocery aisles. She gathered the town in the church basement. She stood on the stage where people usually held potlucks and read scripture, and she told them everything she had seen and heard. She showed them her arm. She read from her grandfather's journal. The room buzzed with tension. At first, people turned away. Some muttered prayers. Others crossed themselves. Someone shouted that she was bringing attention to the thing and would make it worse. She agreed. It might. But she argued that pretending it didn't exist hadn't stopped the mark on her arm, hadn't saved Ellie Morgan, hadn't spared the goats. She said the rope tied around them was the rope of silence, and the only way to cut it was together. A man stood up. He was older, with a beard and hands scarred from years of work. "My boy hears drums at night," he said. "He tells me about red eyes under his bed. I tell him it's his imagination. But I hear them too. My daddy heard them. My granddaddy." His voice broke. "We've been quiet my whole life. It ain't helped." Another woman nodded. "When my sister disappeared, the sheriff told us not to make a fuss. Said attention fed it. I've been holding that in my chest for 15 years. Maybe you're right. Maybe speaking it takes away its teeth." Resistance cracked. Voices rose with stories. They shared, not in whispers, but in declarations. They described the tapping, the lights, the marks, the voices. They said names of lost family. They broke the rules their parents had given them. In speaking, they realized the fear was shared, not a personal madness. In hearing each other, they felt solidarity. The tapping inside their heads grew louder, as if the thing beneath Pine Hollow realized it was being drawn out into the light. The ground trembled. The church lights flickered. Some screamed. Sarah felt a pull on her arm, a tug from under the ground, like the rope Mabel had described. She braced herself. She held onto the pulpit with her gray fingers. "Don't stop," she yelled. "Keep talking." They shouted louder. They prayed and cursed and laughed with hysterical relief. The tremor intensified, then receded. The mark on Sarah's arm burned hot, then cooled. She looked down and saw it had stopped spreading. The gray edge was sharp, not creeping. The center darkened, flaking like ash. She scraped with her fingernail. The gray peeled away, revealing pink, healthy skin underneath. Gasps rippled through the room. Others, with marks on their legs, arms, and backs, watched as the gray cracked and fell like shed snakeskin. Tears flowed. Sarah felt a surge of triumph mixed with dread. Had they angered it? Had they starved it? Had they truly defeated something so old? Or had they woken it fully? Outside, the old house on Ridge Road creaked. Its foundations shifted. A deep rumble shook the ground. People spilled onto the street. They watched as the house's walls bowed outward, then inward, then collapsed in a cloud of dust and splinters. Where the house had stood, the earth caved, revealing a mouth of dark stone stairs. A wind rushed out, carrying the smell of ancient rain. From the mouth came a sound, not like a voice or tapping, but like a deep sigh. Then a whisper, faint but clear, of words in no human language. The air crackled. The cicadas went silent. The whisper continued, rising, falling, a cadence like speech but not. And then it stopped. The hole remained, black and yawning. The people of Pine Hollow stood at the edge, looking down. Some threw rocks and heard no bottom. Others held hands, shaking. Someone suggested filling it with concrete. Someone else said covering it was dangerous because it would burst through somewhere else. Ideas flew. For the first time, they did not defer to silence. They argued, reasoned, collaborated. They decided to post guards. They decided to build a fence. They called the state geology department and planned to let outsiders in for the first time. They acted together. Sarah stood with them, her arm healed, her mind clearer. The tapping in her head had ceased. The rope had slackened. She looked at the hole and felt no pull. She knew the thing beneath still existed, older than they could comprehend, beyond language. But she also knew it was not invincible. It could be resisted. It could be named. It could be survived. She did not stay in Pine Hollow forever. She returned to Charlotte, sold the house, and sent half the money back to the town to repair the church, to fund the library, to install streetlights. She visited often. Sometimes she sat with Mabel and listened to the cicadas, no tapping beneath them. Sometimes she walked to the fenced-off hole and listened. There was no voice, no red light, only wind and the smell of earth. The rope tugged occasionally, but softly. She tugged back. Years later, Pine Hollow was still small, still overlooked. But there were new businesses on Main Street, a renovated school, better football helmets. They spoke openly of the old house, of the thing beneath, as part of their history. Children told the story to newcomers at bonfires, with laughter mixed with shivers. Ellie Morgan's name was carved on a bench by the river. No one else disappeared. The goats ate without fear. And in the city, when Sarah lay in bed and heard a faint tap, tap, tap from her memories, she smiled. She whispered into the dark, "I hear you, but I'm not listening." The tapping faded and she slept.